Sarah Martinez never imagined that a routine grocery run on a Tuesday evening would become the night that defined her entire military career. Standing barely 5'4" in her civilian clothes, pushing a shopping cart through the fluorescent-lit aisles of a Denver supermarket, she looked like any other 23-year-old trying to balance work and life. But beneath her unassuming exterior lay 18 months of the most brutal military training the Navy could offer. What happened next in that parking lot would be talked about in military circles for decades. 3 men, each towering over 7 feet tall, thought they had found an easy target. They were wrong. Dead wrong. This is the true story of how a rookie Navy SEAL turned a terrifying encounter into a lesson that would echo through every training facility, from Coronado to Norfolk. It's a story about preparation meeting opportunity, about the thin line between victim and victor, and about how sometimes the smallest person in the room can be the most dangerous. The security cameras captured it all. 14 seconds, that's all it took. The autumn air in Denver carried the crisp promise of winter as Sarah Martinez pulled into the King Soopers parking lot on East Colfax Avenue. The digital clock on her dashboard read 9:47 p.m., and the lot was mostly empty except for a few scattered cars belonging to late-night shoppers and the overnight crew. She had just finished a grueling day at the Naval Training Facility, where she was completing her final phase of specialized combat training before her first deployment. Sarah had always been small for her age. Throughout high school, she stood barely above her classmates' shoulders, often mistaken for someone much younger. Her parents, both school teachers from Pueblo, Colorado, had worried when she announced her intention to join the Navy. They worried even more when she set her sights on becoming a SEAL. The statistics were daunting. Less than 1% of Navy personnel ever made it through SEAL training, and women had only recently been allowed to attempt the program. But Sarah possessed something that couldn't be measured in height or weight. She had an unshakable determination that had carried her through every obstacle life had thrown her way. When her high school guidance counselor suggested she consider more realistic career paths, Sarah signed up for every advanced physical education class available. When the local gym owner doubted she could handle the weight training program she requested, she showed up every day for 2 years until he hired her as an instructor. The grocery store's automatic doors whooshed open, and Sarah grabbed a cart, reviewing her mental shopping list. After 18 months of military meals, she was looking forward to cooking something that didn't come from a package marked with mysterious government codes. She needed ingredients for the comfort food her grandmother used to make: green chili stew, homemade tortillas, and if she was feeling ambitious, sopapillas for dessert. As she navigated the produce section, selecting onions and garlic, Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She was aware of every exit, every person in her peripheral vision, every sound that seemed out of place. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Her instructors had drilled situational awareness into every trainee until it became as natural as breathing. The store was quiet, with only a handful of customers making their way through the aisles. An elderly woman compared prices on breakfast cereals in aisle 3. A young father pushed a cart with a sleeping toddler through the frozen food section. A store employee restocked shelves in the back corner, his cart loaded with boxes of canned goods. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that someone who could neutralize armed threats in multiple combat scenarios was selecting tomatoes just a few feet away. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her teammate Jake Thompson. "Pizza and beer at Rodriguez's place tomorrow. You in?" She smiled and typed back a quick yes. These simple moments of normalcy were precious to her now. In 3 weeks, she would ship out to her first assignment, somewhere in the Middle East that remained classified. These grocery runs, text messages with friends, and quiet evenings in her small apartment near the base would become distant memories. She moved through the store efficiently, her cart filling with familiar ingredients. In the meat section, she selected beef chuck for the stew, remembering how her grandmother would brown it slowly, letting the aroma fill the entire house. The memory brought a warm smile to her face, one of the last times she felt truly at peace before her life became defined by training schedules, physical tests, and the constant pressure to prove herself, in a world that still questioned whether women belonged in special operations. The checkout process was routine. The teenage cashier, barely older than Sarah, had been when she first decided to join the military, made small talk about the weather while scanning items. Sarah paid in cash, a habit she developed during training when instructors emphasized the importance of keeping transactions untraceable. The receipt showed 10:23 p.m. She'd been in the store longer than planned, but she wasn't in a hurry. Loading her groceries into canvas bags, Sarah headed for the exit. The parking lot was now even emptier than when she'd arrived. The overhead lights cast long shadows between the cars, and a cool wind rustled the leaves that had gathered in the corners of the lot. Her car sat alone in the back section where she'd parked out of habit, Always leave yourself multiple escape routes, never box yourself in. As she pushed her cart across the asphalt, Sarah noticed three figures emerging from behind a large pickup truck about 50 yards away. At first glance, they appeared to be heading toward the store, but something about their movement pattern triggered her training instincts. They weren't walking with the casual gait of people running errands. Their posture was different, purposeful, coordinated, predatory. Sarah continued toward her car, maintaining her normal pace while her mind shifted into tactical mode. She cataloged details automatically. Three males, all exceptionally tall, each appearing to be well over 7 feet. The one in the middle wore a dark hoodie and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to using his size to intimidate others. The one on the left had visible tattoos covering his forearms and walked with a slight limp that suggested an old injury. The third man, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, kept his hands in his jacket pockets in a way that made Sarah's tactical alarm bells ring. They changed direction. Instead of continuing toward the store, all three men altered their path to intercept her route to the car. Was subtle. The kind of movement that most people wouldn't notice until it was too late. But Sarah wasn't most people. She had spent months learning to read body language, to identify threats before they materialized, to recognize the difference between coincidence and intention. Sarah reached her car and began loading groceries into the trunk, using the action as cover while she assessed the situation. The men were now approximately 30 yards away and closing. Their formation was deliberate. They had spread out to prevent her from easily moving around them. The one in the middle was clearly the leader, with the other two positioned to flank any escape attempt. She closed the trunk and moved to the driver's side door, fishing her keys from her pocket. The familiar weight of the car key between her fingers was reassuring, but she was also acutely aware of everything else on her keychain, including the small tactical flashlight she'd carried since her first week of training. 20 yards. The men were no longer pretending to have any destination other than her. Their pace had increased and she could see their faces more clearly now. The leader had a scar running from his left temple to his jawline, and his eyes held the kind of cold calculation that Sarah had learned to recognize during her training in threat assessment. These weren't opportunistic criminals. They were experienced predators who had done this before. Sarah made a decision that would save her life. Instead of getting into her car, which would put her in a confined space and limit her options, she stepped away from the vehicle and turned to face them directly. Her stance appeared casual to any observer, but her weight was balanced on the balls of her feet, her hands loose and ready, her mind calculating distances and angles. "Evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Can I help you with something?" The leader smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Matter of fact, you can, sweetheart. We're a little short on cash tonight, and you look like someone who might be willing to help out some guys who've had a rough day." His companions spread out wider, positioning themselves to cut off any escape route toward the store or the street. They were professionals at this, Sarah realized. They had done this enough times to have developed a system. The leader would do the talking while his partners controlled the space. They would use their size to intimidate, their numbers to overwhelm, and their experience to prevent their target from calling for help or escaping. What they didn't know was that their target had spent 18 months learning to fight people bigger, stronger, and more experienced than she was. They didn't know that she had been trained by instructors who specialized in teaching smaller fighters how to neutralize larger opponents. They didn't know that every day for the past year and a half she had practiced techniques specifically designed for situations exactly like this. "I understand you're having a tough time," Sarah replied, maintaining her calm tone while her eyes tracked all three men's positions. "But I'm not carrying cash tonight, and I'm sure there are other people who'd be more helpful." The leader laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "See, that's where you're wrong, little girl. We've been watching you shop, and we know you paid cash in there. Plus there's your car, your phone, probably some credit cards. You're going to be plenty helpful." The man with the limp spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly and harsh. "Come on, Marcus. Let's just get this over with. I'm tired of standing around." Marcus, now Sarah knew the leader's name, held up a hand to silence his companion. "Now, Tommy, where are your manners? The lady and I are having a conversation." He took 2 more steps toward Sarah, bringing himself within arm's reach. "Here's how this is going to work, sweetheart. You're going to give us everything valuable you have on you, and then you're going to get in that car and drive us somewhere quiet where we can discuss this further. If you cooperate, nobody gets hurt." The third man, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "What if she doesn't want to cooperate, Marcus?" Marcus's smile widened, revealing teeth that had seen better days. "Well, Danny, that would be unfortunate. For her." Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering their proposal. "I see your point," she said. Let me just grab my purse from the car. She turned slightly as if reaching for her vehicle, and in that moment, everything changed. The moment Sarah turned toward her car, Marcus made his first mistake. Believing her compliance was genuine, he relaxed slightly and moved closer, reaching out to grab her shoulder and maintain control of the situation. In his experience, once people accepted their fate and started cooperating, they rarely fought back. He had done this dozens of times, and it always followed the same pattern: initial resistance, negotiation, acceptance, and then complete submission. Sarah felt his large hand make contact with her shoulder, and 18 months of intensive combat training took over. Her response was instantaneous and devastating. She spun back toward Marcus, her right elbow driving upward into his solar plexus with the full force of her rotation behind it. The strike landed with surgical precision, hitting the cluster of nerves just below his sternum and immediately disrupting his diaphragm's ability to function. Marcus doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come, his face turning an alarming shade of red. Before Tommy and Danny could process what had happened to their leader, Sarah was already moving. Her left hand shot out and grabbed Marcus by his hoodie, using his forward momentum and her leverage to pull him down while her right knee drove upward. The knee strike caught Marcus in the face with a sickening crack that echoed across the parking lot. Blood exploded from his nose, and he crumpled to the asphalt, unconscious before he hit the ground. Total time elapsed: 2 seconds. Tommy, the man with the limp, reacted first. "What the hell?" he shouted, lunging towards Sarah with his arms outstretched, intending to tackle her to the ground. His injured leg slowed him slightly, but he still possessed a significant size and weight advantage. Under normal circumstances, his charge would have been overwhelming. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Sarah wasn't a normal target. As Tommy closed the distance, Sarah sidestepped at the last possible moment, using his momentum against him. She grabbed his right wrist with both hands and twisted sharply while planting her foot behind his injured leg. The combination of the wrist control, the leverage, and his compromised balance sent Tommy sprawling face first into the side of Sarah's car with a tremendous crash. The impact dented the passenger door and left Tommy stunned, his forehead bleeding from where it had struck the door handle. Sarah maintained her grip on his wrist and applied a control hold she had practiced thousands of times in training. By rotating his arm and applying pressure to specific joints, she could cause excruciating pain while keeping him immobilized. Tommy tried to pull away, but any movement only increased the agony shooting through his shoulder and wrist. "Stay down," Sarah commanded, her voice calm but carrying an authority that Tommy had never heard from someone half his size. Danny, the third attacker, had been reaching into his jacket pocket when Marcus went down. Now, with his companions neutralized in less than 5 seconds, he pulled out a folding knife and flicked it open. The blade was approximately 4 inches long and appeared well maintained. His hands were shaking slightly, but his grip on the weapon was firm. "Let him go, or I'm going to cut you up," Danny threatened, holding the knife in front of him as he advanced. Unlike his companions, Danny had some experience with edged weapons, and he held the blade properly, point forward, cutting edge up, ready to slash or thrust. Sarah assessed the new threat while maintaining her control hold on Tommy. A knife changed the dynamics significantly, but not in the way Danny expected. During her training, Sarah had spent weeks learning to disarm armed opponents, and she had discovered that many people became overconfident when they held weapons. They often telegraphed their intentions and relied too heavily on the weapon's intimidation factor rather than proper technique. "I don't want to hurt anyone else," Sarah said calmly, though she had no intention of releasing Tommy until the situation was completely under control. "But if you come at me with that knife, I will defend myself." Danny laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "You think you're some kind of tough girl? Look around, your luck just ran out. There's nowhere to run, and I'm not as stupid as Marcus and Tommy." He was partially correct. The parking lot offered limited escape routes, and Danny was positioned between Sarah and the store entrance. Her car was blocked by Tommy's body, and the street was too far away to reach before Danny could close the distance. But Danny was wrong about one crucial thing. Sarah wasn't looking to run. Danny finted to his left, then lunged forward with the knife aimed at Sarah's midsection. The attack was faster than his companion's attempts, but still telegraphed enough for someone with Sarah's training to read and counter. Sarah released Tommy's wrist and stepped to her right, causing Danny's thrust to pass harmlessly beside her. As the knife extended past her body, she trapped Danny's knife hand between her left arm and her ribs, pinning the weapon. Simultaneously, her right hand shot up and struck Danny's throat with the edge of her palm, targeting his larynx with just enough force to disrupt his breathing without causing permanent damage. Danny made a choking sound and tried to pull his knife hand free, but Sarah maintained the pin while her left hand reached across and grabbed his knife-wielding wrist. She twisted sharply, the same technique she had used on Tommy, while stepping back and to the side. The combination forced Danny to choose between dropping the knife or having his wrist broken. He chose to drop the knife. The blade clattered onto the asphalt, and Sarah kicked it away while maintaining her grip on Danny's wrist. She applied the same control hold she had used on Tommy, and Danny immediately dropped to one knee as pain shot through his arm and shoulder. "I told you not to come at me with that knife," Sarah said matter-of-factly. Tommy had managed to push himself away from the car and was trying to stand, blood still flowing from his forehead. He looked at Marcus, who remained motionless on the ground. Then at Danny, who was clearly in agony from the wrist control. The fight had lasted less than 15 seconds, and all three attackers were neutralized. "What the hell are you?" Tommy gasped, touching his wounded forehead. Sarah maintained her control of Danny while keeping Tommy in her peripheral vision. "I'm someone you picked the wrong night to mess with," she replied. The parking lot was eerily quiet except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing as he began to regain consciousness. In the distance, Sarah could hear traffic on Colfax Avenue and the hum of the store's air conditioning units, but no sounds of approaching help. The store's security cameras had undoubtedly recorded the entire encounter, but she doubted anyone was monitoring them in real time. Marcus rolled onto his side and slowly pushed himself up to a sitting position, his nose clearly broken and his shirt covered in blood. When he saw his two companions under Sarah's control, his expression shifted from confusion to something approaching respect. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, wiping blood from his mouth. "What are you, some kind of cop?" "Navy," Sarah replied simply. Marcus nodded slowly as if that explained everything.
"Special Forces?"
Sarah didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. "Look," Marcus said, struggling to his feet while keeping his hands visible. "We made a mistake. We thought you were just..." He gestured vaguely, unable to find words that wouldn't make the situation worse. "You thought I was just a small woman alone in a parking lot." Sarah finished for him. "Someone who couldn't defend herself." Marcus wiped more blood from his nose and nodded.
"Yeah."
"That's what we thought." The admission hung in the air for a moment. Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. She could call the police, which would involve hours of paperwork, statements, and potentially unwanted attention from her commanding officers. Military personnel were expected to avoid civilian altercations when possible. And while she had clearly acted in self-defense, the incident would still require explanation and documentation. Alternatively, she could handle this her own way. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority she had learned from her drill instructors. "You three are going to walk away from here, and you're never going to approach another woman in a parking lot again. You're going to find legitimate ways to make money, and you're going to remember what happened here tonight every time you think about taking the easy way." Danny tried to pull his wrist free, but Sarah increased the pressure slightly, and he immediately stopped moving. "What if we don't?" he gasped. Sarah looked at each of them in turn. "Then next time I might not be in such a good mood." Marcus gathered himself and walked over to help Danny to his feet as Sarah released the wrist control. Tommy limped over to join them, still dabbing at his bleeding forehead with his sleeve. "The knife stays here," Sarah said, gesturing to the weapon on the ground. "And if I ever see any of you again, anywhere, I'm going to assume you're looking for round two." The three men exchanged glances, clearly debating whether to try again or cut their losses. Marcus, despite his injuries, seemed to be calculating odds and angles. Tommy appeared ready to fight again, his wounded pride overriding his common sense. Danny just wanted to leave. "Marcus," Danny said quietly, "let's go. This isn't worth it." Marcus stared at Sarah for a long moment, taking in her relaxed stance and steady breathing. She didn't look like someone who had just been in a fight. She looked like someone who was ready for the next one. "Yeah," Marcus finally agreed. "This isn't worth it." The three men began walking toward the street, moving slowly and keeping their hands visible. Sarah watched them go while retrieving Danny's knife and her car keys. As they reached the edge of the parking lot, Marcus turned back. "Hey," he called out. "What's your name?" Sarah considered the question for a moment. "Someone you don't want to meet again." Marcus nodded and disappeared into the darkness with his companions. Sarah was alone in the parking lot once again, holding a folding knife and standing next to her dented car. Her groceries were still in the trunk, her hands were steady, and her heart rate was already returning to normal. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, considering her options. She could call the police and report the attempted robbery. She could call her commanding officer and file an incident report. She could call Jake and tell him about her evening's adventure. Instead, she put her phone away, got in her car, and drove home to make green chili stew. The security guard at King Soopers didn't discover the incident till his routine patrol at midnight. The store's cameras had captured everything, but the security monitoring station was understaffed, and nobody had been watching the feeds in real time. When Jerry Martinez, no relation to Sarah, reviewed the footage, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Jerry had been working security for 12 years, mostly dealing with shoplifters, drunk customers, and the occasional parking lot fender bender. He had never seen anything like what appeared on his screen. A small woman taking down 3 large men in what appeared to be less than 20 seconds was the kind of thing you expected to see in movies, not in a suburban Denver grocery store parking lot. He watched the footage 5 times before calling his supervisor, then watched it 3 more times while waiting for her to arrive. By morning, copies of the security footage had been shared with the Denver Police Department, the store's corporate security team, and, through channels that Jerry never fully understood, certain military personnel who had a professional interest in such matters. Meanwhile, Sarah Martinez was in her small apartment 2 miles away, stirring a pot of green chile stew and trying to process what had happened. The adrenaline had worn off during the drive home, replaced by a strange mixture of satisfaction and concern. She had handled herself exactly as her training dictated, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the incident would have consequences beyond what she could control. Her phone rang at 11:30 p.m. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the timing made her answer. Petty Officer Martinez? The voice was male, authoritative, and completely professional. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, automatically snapping to attention despite being alone in her kitchen. This is Commander Bradley Roberts, Naval Special Operations. I need to speak with you regarding an incident that occurred this evening. Are you able to talk? Sarah's heart sank. Somehow, the parking lot encounter had already reached her chain of command. Yes, sir. I can talk. Good. First, are you injured or in need of medical attention?
No, sir. I'm uninjured.
First, I'm uninjured. Second, I want you to know that based on the preliminary information I've received, it appears you acted appropriately in defending yourself against multiple attackers. However, we need to discuss the incident in detail. Can you report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning? Yes, sir. Bring a written report of the evening's events. Include everything. Where you were, what you observed, how the situation developed, and exactly what actions you took. Leave nothing out. Sarah spent the next 3 hours writing her report, revising it multiple times to ensure accuracy and completeness. By 2:30 a.m., she had produced a detailed 5-page account of everything from her decision to go grocery shopping to her choice not to call the police afterward. She read it one final time, saved it to her laptop, and tried to get some sleep. At exactly 0800, the next morning, Sarah stood outside Commander Roberts' office at the naval facility. She had arrived 30 minutes early and spent the time reviewing her report and preparing for questions she couldn't anticipate. When the secretary finally called her name, Sarah entered the office with her report printed in her mind clear. Commander Roberts was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of precise bearing that suggested extensive special operations experience. His office was Spartan but functional, with commendations and unit photographs covering one wall, and tactical manuals filling the bookshelf behind his desk. Petty Officer Martinez, he said, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming in. I've read the preliminary police report and reviewed the security footage from last night. Before we discuss specifics, I want you to know that from what I've seen, you handled yourself admirably in a dangerous situation. Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Thank you, sir. However, Roberts continued, the incident raises several issues that we need to address. The most immediate concern is media attention. The security footage has already been shared with local law enforcement, and it's only a matter of time before it reaches local news outlets. A video of a Navy SEAL trainee neutralizing 3 attackers in a grocery store parking lot is exactly the kind of story that generates significant public interest. Sarah hadn't considered the media angle. Sir, what does that mean for my training and deployment schedule? Roberts opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several documents. That depends on how we handle this. The Navy has 2 options. We can treat this as a private incident that happened to involve military personnel, or we can use it as an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of our training programs. Sir, I would prefer to keep this private if possible. I understand your preference, and under normal circumstances, I would agree. However, there are factors beyond our control. The Denver Police Department has issued a statement praising your actions and calling you a model citizen who defended herself against criminal assault. The grocery store chain is considering using the incident in their security training materials. And the footage itself is compelling. Roberts turned his computer monitor toward Sarah, and she saw herself on the screen, frozen in the moment just before Marcus reached for her shoulder. The camera angle was perfect, capturing everything in high definition. "Sir, I just want to complete my training and serve my country. I don't want to be famous. Unfortunately, Petty Officer Martinez, fame may not be something you can avoid. The question is whether we manage this situation proactively or let it manage itself." Roberts explained the Navy's proposal. Rather than trying to suppress the story, they wanted to use Sarah's experience as a case study in effective self-defense training. She would be assigned to a special projects team that developed and tested new combat techniques for smaller personnel. Her deployment would be delayed by 6 months, but she would receive advanced training and work with some of the most experienced instructors in special operations. "Think of it as a lateral move," Roberts said. "You'll still be serving in special operations, but you'll be helping to train the next generation of SEALs while continuing your own development." Sarah considered the offer carefully. The delay was disappointing, but the opportunity to work with elite trainers and contribute to program development was intriguing. "Sir, what about the 3 men from last night? Have they been arrested?" Roberts consulted his folder again. Marcus Williams, Thomas Patterson, and Daniel Cruz were arrested early this morning at a downtown hotel. They were identified through the security footage and arrested on charges of attempted robbery and assault. Williams had outstanding warrants in 2 other states, and all 3 have extensive criminal records. They're looking at significant prison time. Will I need to testify at their trial?
Most likely, yes.
But the security footage provides clear evidence of their intent and your response. The case should be straightforward. Sarah made her decision. "Sir, I accept the reassignment." "When do I start?" Roberts smiled for the first time during their meeting. "Monday morning. You'll be working with a team that includes some of the most innovative combat instructors in the military. They're very interested in analyzing your techniques and understanding how you managed to neutralize 3 larger opponents so efficiently." Over the next several days, Sarah's life changed dramatically. The security footage was leaked to local news stations, then picked up by national outlets. Within a week, the video had been viewed millions of times online, with commentary from self-defense experts, military analysts, and social media influencers. The attention was overwhelming and unwanted, but Sarah discovered that it also brought unexpected opportunities. She received invitations to speak at self-defense seminars, messages from young women inspired by her example, and even a few movie and television offers that she immediately declined. More importantly, she began working with a team of instructors who were revolutionizing military combat training. Her experience in the parking lot had demonstrated the effectiveness of techniques that many traditionalists had dismissed as impractical. Now, those same techniques were being incorporated into standard training protocols. Sarah's new assignment involved teaching smaller personnel how to fight larger opponents, developing new techniques for close-quarters combat, and analyzing real-world encounters to improve training methods. It wasn't the deployment she had originally envisioned, but it was meaningful work that could potentially save lives. 3 months after the parking lot incident, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the naval facility. Jake Thompson, her teammate who had invited her to pizza the night of the encounter, knocked on her office door with a grin on his face. "So I hear you're famous now," Jake said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Infamous is more like it," Sarah replied. "I can't go anywhere without someone recognizing me from that video. Could be worse. You could be those 3 idiots who thought they could rob a Navy SEAL." Sarah laughed. "They didn't know I was a SEAL. They just saw a small woman alone in a parking lot. Yeah, well, they learned better. I heard Williams is telling everyone in prison that he got taken down by a ninja." "A ninja? That's what he's calling you." "Says he never even saw you move." Sarah shook her head, but she was smiling. The incident had changed her life in ways she never could have anticipated, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones that find you in grocery store parking lots on ordinary Tuesday nights. Jake pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a news article. "Did you see this? The grocery store chain is implementing new security measures based on your incident. Better lighting, more cameras, and security patrols focused on protecting customers." Sarah scanned the article, noting that King Soopers had hired additional security personnel and installed emergency call stations throughout their parking areas. The changes had been implemented at stores nationwide, potentially protecting thousands of customers. "I guess some good came out of it," Sarah said. "Some good?" "Sarah, you've revolutionized how the Navy teaches close-quarters combat. You've inspired countless women to take self-defense classes, You've made grocery shopping safer for everyone. And you've proven that size doesn't determine who wins a fight. Training and mindset do. Sarah appreciated Jake's perspective, but she still struggled with the attention. She had joined the military to serve her country, not to become a celebrity. The constant requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and media appearances were a distraction from what she considered her real work. However, she was beginning to understand that her real work might have evolved beyond what she had originally envisioned. The techniques she was developing and teaching were being used by military personnel worldwide. The confidence she inspired in smaller personnel was measurable in their performance scores and deployment readiness. The parking lot incident had been random and unwanted, but its consequences were far-reaching and positive. 6 months after the parking lot incident, Sarah found herself standing in front of 200 military personnel at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California. The audience included SEAL instructors, Marine combat trainers, Army Special Forces personnel, and Air Force security specialists. They had come to watch a demonstration of the techniques that had made Sarah Martinez famous throughout the military community. The demonstration pit was a carefully controlled environment designed to replicate real-world combat scenarios. Today's exercise would pit Sarah against 3 male volunteers, each over 6 feet tall and weighing at least twice what she did. The volunteers were experienced military personnel who had been briefed on the scenario but not on Sarah's specific techniques. Commander Roberts stood at the microphone addressing the assembled crowd. What you're about to see is not a choreographed demonstration. Petty Officer Martinez will be responding to a simulated assault using the same techniques she employed in Denver 6 months ago. The volunteers have been instructed to act as aggressive assailants attempting to subdue and control her. Sarah stood calmly in the center of the pit, wearing standard training gear and a microphone that would allow the audience to hear her commands and responses. She had conducted dozens of these demonstrations over the past months, but the audience size and composition made this one particularly important. The techniques she had developed were being considered for inclusion in standard military training protocols, and today's demonstration would influence that decision. The 3 volunteers entered the pit from different positions, surrounding Sarah in a formation similar to what Marcus, Tommy, and Danny had used in the parking lot. The lead volunteer, Staff Sergeant Mike Harrison from the Marine Corps, was instructed to initiate contact while his companions controlled the perimeter. Remember, Roberts announced to the audience, Petty Officer Martinez is 5'4" and weighs 128 pounds. Her opponents are all over 6 feet tall and weigh between 190 and 230 pounds. In a traditional strength-based confrontation, she would be at a severe disadvantage. Harrison approached Sarah with confident aggression, reaching out to grab her shoulder just as Marcus had done in the parking lot. Sarah's response was identical to that night, a spinning elbow strike to the solar plexus followed by a knee to the face as Harrison doubled over. The Marine hit the mat unconscious within 2 seconds. The second volunteer, Army Specialist David Kim, reacted faster than Tommy had in the original encounter. He lunged forward immediately, attempting to tackle Sarah before she could reset her position. Sarah sidestepped and used Kim's momentum to send him crashing into the pit's padded wall, then applied the same wrist control technique that had neutralized Tommy. The third volunteer, Navy Petty Officer Carlos Rodriguez, had learned from watching his companion's mistakes. Instead of charging directly at Sarah, he circled to her left while she controlled Kim, looking for an opening that wouldn't leave him vulnerable to the same techniques that had defeated the others. This was where Sarah's training had evolved beyond the original parking lot encounter. Working with her instructors, she had developed methods for handling multiple opponents who were aware of her capabilities and actively trying to counter them. Rodriguez attempted a more sophisticated approach, feinting towards Sarah's right side while actually moving left, trying to get behind her while she was occupied with Kim. Sarah recognized the tactic and responded with a technique she had developed specifically for this scenario. She released Kim's wrist and dropped into a low crouch, sweeping Rodriguez's legs while simultaneously striking Kim's knee to destabilize him. Both men went down and Sarah immediately transitioned to control positions on both opponents, using leverage and joint manipulation to prevent them from regaining their feet. Total time, 8 seconds. The audience erupted in applause, but Sarah remained focused on maintaining control until the referees called the exercise complete. As the volunteers helped each other to their feet, Harrison was awake but groggy. Sarah walked to the center of the pit to address the audience. "What you just saw isn't magic," she said into her microphone. "It's the result of understanding leverage, timing, and the human body's vulnerable points. Every technique I used can be learned and applied by anyone, regardless of size or strength."
Commander Roberts joined Sarah in the pit.
Petty Officer Martinez will now break down each technique she used, explaining the principles behind her actions and how they can be adapted for different scenarios. For the next hour, Sarah walked the audience through every movement, explaining the biomechanics of leverage, the importance of timing, and the psychology of confrontation. She demonstrated how smaller personnel could use an attacker's size and momentum against them, turning apparent disadvantages into tactical advantages. The Q&A session that followed was intense and detailed. Instructors wanted to understand how to teach these techniques to their students. Operational personnel wanted to know how the methods applied to armed combat and team scenarios. Medical personnel asked about injury risks and safety protocols. One question came from a female Marine captain who had been taking notes throughout the demonstration. Petty Officer Martinez, these techniques require significant training and practice to execute effectively. How do we prepare personnel for situations where they might need to use these skills with minimal warning? Sarah had been expecting this question. It was the core issue that had driven her research over the past 6 months. Captain, that's exactly why we've developed what we call situational awareness protocols. The techniques are only one part of the equation. The more important element is recognizing potential threats before they become actual attacks. Sarah explained how her training had taught her to read body language, assess environmental factors, and position herself strategically in potentially dangerous situations. In the original incident, I knew I was dealing with a coordinated threat 30 seconds before the first man reached for me. That advance warning allowed me to prepare mentally and position myself optimally. Another question came from an Army Special Forces major. How do these techniques translate to combat operations where personnel might be carrying equipment, wearing armor, or operating in confined spaces? Sarah had anticipated this as well. Her team had spent months adapting the techniques for various operational scenarios. Major, we've tested these methods in full combat gear, in vehicle interiors, and in structures with limited mobility. The principles remain the same, but the application requires modification based on equipment and environment. She demonstrated several variations, showing how the basic techniques could be adapted for personnel wearing body armor or carrying weapons. The key was understanding the fundamental biomechanics rather than memorizing specific movements. As the formal session concluded, Sarah was approached by dozens of personnel wanting additional information, requesting copies of training materials, and proposing collaboration on further development. The techniques that had originated in a grocery store parking lot were now being integrated into training programs across all branches of the military. But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source. As Sarah was packing her equipment, a young woman in Navy enlisted dress approached hesitantly. Petty Officer Martinez, I'm Seaman Rebecca Chen. I've been following your work since the parking lot video went viral. Sarah looked at Chen, noting her nervous posture and uncertain expression. What can I do for you, Seaman Chen? Well, I'm scheduled to start SEAL training next year, and I'm not very big. Actually, I'm smaller than you are. People keep telling me I should consider other career paths. But watching what you did, and learning about your training methods, it's given me hope that size doesn't have to be a limitation. Sarah smiled, remembering her own doubts and the discouraging comments she had received from well-meaning advisors. Seaman Chen, size is just one factor in a complex equation. Your determination, your intelligence, your ability to learn and adapt, those matter much more than your height or weight. Chen pulled out a notebook filled with detailed notes from the demonstration. I've been studying everything you've published about these techniques. I've been practicing them at the gym, working with larger partners to understand the principles you described. That's excellent preparation, Sarah said. But remember, the physical techniques are only part of what you'll need. The mental preparation is equally important. You need to believe in your ability to succeed, even when others doubt you. Chen nodded eagerly. That's what I learned from your story. You didn't just win a fight in a parking lot. You proved that training and mindset can overcome physical disadvantages. As Sarah watched Chen walk away with renewed confidence, she realized that the parking lot incident had accomplished something she never could have planned. It had become a symbol of possibility for countless people who had been told they weren't big enough, strong enough, or tough enough to pursue their goals. The demonstration at Coronado was filmed and distributed throughout the military training community. Within weeks, Sarah's techniques were being taught at bases worldwide. The Martinez method, as it came to be known, became standard training for personnel who might face larger opponents in close-quarters situations. But more importantly, Sarah's story continued to inspire people who felt limited by their physical characteristics. Letters arrived regularly from young women entering military service, law enforcement officers working in dangerous neighborhoods, and civilian self-defense instructors who had adapted her techniques for their students. One letter from a high school student in Sarah's hometown of Pueblo, Colorado, particularly touched her. The student wrote, I used to think I was too small to stand up to the bullies at my school. After seeing what you did, I started taking martial arts classes. Last week, when 3 seniors tried to corner me in the parking lot, I remembered your story. I didn't have to fight them. Just the way I stood and spoke made them realize I wasn't an easy target. They walked away. Sarah kept that letter in her desk drawer, along with dozens of others that reminded her why the unwanted fame had ultimately been worth enduring. The parking lot incident had lasted 14 seconds, but its impact continued to grow and spread in ways she was still discovering. As she prepared for her next assignment, developing advanced combat training protocols for special operations personnel worldwide, Sarah reflected on how a routine grocery run had changed not just her life, but potentially the lives of thousands of people she would never meet. The 3 men who had approached her that night had thought they were selecting an easy target. Instead, they had unknowingly chosen someone whose response would revolutionize military training, inspire countless individuals to pursue their goals despite physical limitations, and demonstrate that preparation, training, and mindset could overcome almost any disadvantage. Marcus, Tommy, and Danny were now serving lengthy prison sentences, their names forgotten by everyone except law enforcement databases. But Sarah Martinez had become a symbol of possibility, proof that heroes come in all sizes, and that sometimes the most important victories happen in the most unexpected places. 2 years after the parking lot encounter that changed her life, Sarah Martinez stood on the stage of the Pentagon's main auditorium, addressing an audience of senior military officials, defense contractors, and international allies. The woman who had once hoped to serve quietly in special operations had become one of the most influential voices in modern military training. The auditorium was packed with over 800 attendees, including generals, admirals, and defense ministers from allied nations. Sarah's techniques had been adopted by military forces in 23 countries, and her training methods had reduced injury rates in hand-to-hand combat training by 40% while dramatically improving effectiveness scores. 2 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. I was a rookie SEAL trainee who just wanted to buy groceries and go home to make dinner. I had no idea that 14 seconds in a parking lot would lead to this moment. Speaking to you about the future of military training. The audience included familiar faces from Sarah's journey. Commander Roberts sat in the front row, now promoted to captain, and serving as her direct supervisor in the Special Operations Training Innovation Division. Jake Thompson was there, recently returned from a successful deployment where his team had used Sarah's techniques to neutralize hostile forces in close-quarters combat. Even Jerry Martinez, the security guard who had first discovered the parking lot footage, had been invited to attend. But the most important person in the audience was sitting quietly in the third row, Rebecca Chen, now Petty Officer Chen, who had not only completed SEAL training, but had graduated first in her class. Chen's success had inspired a new generation of women to pursue special operations careers, and her own innovations were now being incorporated into training protocols. The Martinez method isn't just about physical techniques, Sarah continued. It's about understanding that every perceived weakness can become a strength if approached correctly. It's about preparation meeting opportunity. Most importantly, it's about refusing to accept limitations that others try to impose on us. Sarah's presentation included video analysis of her techniques being used successfully in real-world operations. A Marine unit in Afghanistan had used her methods to subdue insurgents without casualties. A Navy boarding party had employed her tactics to retake a hijacked vessel. Army Special Forces had adapted her principles for urban warfare scenarios, but the most compelling evidence came from the transformation in training outcomes. Military personnel who learned Sarah's methods showed increased confidence, reduced fear of larger opponents, and improved performance in high-stress situations. The psychological impact of believing you could defend yourself effectively had profound effects on overall military readiness. During the Q&A session, a question came from General Patricia Williams, the highest-ranking woman in the Army.
Petty Officer Martinez, your methods have clearly revolutionized how we approach close-quarters combat training.
What do you see as the next evolution of these techniques? Sarah had been preparing for this question for months. Her team had been developing something unprecedented, a comprehensive training program that combined physical techniques, psychological preparation, and technological assistance. General Williams, we're working on what we call adaptive combat intelligence, a system that helps personnel assess threats in real time and select optimal responses based on their physical characteristics, training level, and environmental factors. It's like having an experienced instructor providing guidance during actual confrontations. The system used advanced sensors and artificial intelligence to analyze combat situations and provide tactical recommendations through discrete audio feedback. Personnel wearing the system could receive instant advice on positioning, timing, and technique selection based on their opponent's size, stance, and apparent skill level. A demonstration followed, with Sarah wearing the prototype system while facing multiple opponents in various scenarios. The audience watched as she received real-time tactical guidance that helped her adapt her techniques to each situation's unique challenges. The technology was still in development, but early tests showed remarkable improvements in combat effectiveness, especially for personnel facing larger or more experienced opponents. The system was being designed to work with existing military equipment and could potentially be deployed to operational units within 2 years. After the formal presentation, Sarah was approached by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a biomechanics researcher from MIT who had been studying her techniques. Petty Officer Martinez, I've been analyzing the physics of your methods, and I believe we can enhance their effectiveness through better understanding of human kinetic chains and leverage principles. Dr. Rodriguez explained how advanced motion analysis had revealed subtle aspects of Sarah's techniques that weren't visible to casual observation. By understanding these hidden elements, they could teach the methods more effectively and develop new variations for specific scenarios. This collaboration between military training and academic research represented a new approach to combat preparation. Instead of relying solely on traditional methods passed down through generations of instructors, they were using scientific analysis to understand why certain techniques worked and how they could be improved. The implications extended beyond military applications. Law enforcement agencies were adapting Sarah's methods for situations where officers faced larger suspects. Security personnel at airports, government buildings, and corporate facilities were learning techniques that allowed them to control situations without escalating to deadly force. But perhaps the most meaningful application came from civilian self-defense programs. Sarah's techniques were being taught in high schools, colleges, and community centers across the country. Crime statistics showed measurable reductions in successful assaults against people who had learned her methods, particularly women and smaller individuals. One program that especially pleased Sarah was running in her hometown of Pueblo, Colorado. Her former high school had implemented a mandatory self-defense course based on her techniques. Bullying incidents had dropped significantly, students reported feeling more confident, and several potential assaults had been prevented by would-be victims who projected confidence and capability. As the Pentagon event concluded, Sarah was approached by her original commanding officer from SEAL training, Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. He had been one of her toughest instructors, pushing her to limits she didn't know she possessed. Martinez, he said, using the informal address that indicated respect among equals, when you were in my training class, I knew you had something special. But I never imagined you'd revolutionize how we think about combat. Sarah smiled, remembering the countless hours of grueling training under Rodriguez's supervision. Master Chief, you taught me that the mind is the most important weapon. Everything else just follows from that. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Speaking of weapons, I have something for you. He handed Sarah a small package wrapped in official Navy paper. Inside was a custom-made tactical knife with her name engraved on the handle, along with the inscription, "Size matters less than heart, SEAL Team Training Command." It was a gift from her former classmates, many of whom were now serving in operational units around the world. They wanted you to know that you're still part of the team, Rodriguez explained. Even if your mission changed, you're still fighting the same fight, just on a different battlefield. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment near the Pentagon, the same modest space she had maintained since accepting her current assignment. The walls were covered with photos from her journey, the original security camera footage from the parking lot, images from training demonstrations around the world, letters from people whose lives had been changed by her story. One photo held special significance. It showed Sarah with a group of young women who had recently completed SEAL training, all of whom cited her example as inspiration for their career choices. These women represented something unprecedented in military history, a generation that believed physical limitations could be overcome through training, intelligence, and determination. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, my name is Emma Thompson. I'm 16 years old, and I've been studying your techniques after being bullied at school. Today, 3 older students tried to corner me in the parking lot after basketball practice. I remembered your story and used what I learned. I didn't have to fight them. They could tell I wasn't afraid anymore, and they just walked away. Thank you for showing me that being small doesn't mean being helpless. Reading the message, Sarah was transported back to that night in the King Soopers parking lot. She remembered the moment when Marcus reached for her shoulder, the split-second decision that led to everything that followed. At the time, she had simply been defending herself, responding to a threat with her training. She could never have imagined that those 14 seconds would lead to this moment. Sitting in her apartment, reading a message from a teenager halfway across the country who had found the courage to stand up to bullies because of something that happened in a grocery store parking lot 2 years earlier. Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the lights of Washington, D.C. Somewhere in this city and around the world, people were learning techniques that started with her encounter with three men who thought she was an easy target. Military personnel were training with methods that could save their lives in combat. Young people were developing confidence that would serve them throughout their lives. The parking lot incident had lasted 14 seconds, but its ripple effects would continue for generations. Three criminals had unknowingly chosen a victim whose response would inspire countless people to refuse the role of victim themselves. As Sarah prepared for bed, she thought about the question General Williams had asked earlier. What was the next evolution of these techniques? The answer went beyond technology or training methods. The next evolution was cultural, creating a world where people understood that their physical characteristics didn't determine their potential, where training and mindset mattered more than size and strength, where everyone had the tools and confidence to defend themselves and others. The woman who had once just wanted to serve her country quietly in special operations had become something she never expected, a symbol of possibility. Her story proved that heroes come in all sizes, that preparation can overcome almost any disadvantage, and that sometimes the most important battles are won by people who never sought the fight but refused to lose when it found them. Marcus Williams, Thomas Patterson, and Daniel Cruz had thought they were selecting a victim that night in Denver. Instead, they had chosen someone whose response would change the world's understanding of what it means to be strong, what it means to be prepared, and what it means to refuse to be defined by other people's expectations. The 14 seconds that changed Sarah Martinez's life had also changed countless other lives, and the transformation was just beginning. In training facilities around the world, in classrooms and community centers, in parking lots and playgrounds, people were learning that size doesn't determine strength. Determination does. And somewhere in Denver, at a King Superstore on East Colfax Avenue, a plaque in the parking lot marked the spot where everything began. The inscription read, "On this site, Petty Officer Sarah Martinez demonstrated that courage comes in all sizes and that proper training can overcome any disadvantage. Her actions on this night inspired a generation to believe in their own strength." The plaque didn't mention the 14 seconds that changed everything. It didn't need to. Everyone who read it already knew the story of the 7-foot Titans who thought they had found an easy target, and the 5'4" Navy SEAL who proved them wrong in the most decisive 14 seconds of her life.